Home Office has hired an aircraft hangar and a fuselage to enable security officers to rehearse forcing migrants onto deportation flights. Guards are undergoing specialist training to deal with disruptive detainees and protests outside the airfields from human rights activists. The Prime Minister has vowed to get his controversial Rwanda plan through Parliament, although his ambition to get planes in the air by spring appears increasingly optimistic. On a visit to Hampshire, he doubled down on his pledge to stop the boats.
Well, I think it's really important that we stop the boats. It was one of the priorities I set out for the country last year. I'm pleased that our plan is working and that we're making progress. The numbers last year were down by over a third. That hasn't happened before, so that shows that we can make a difference here. But in order to fully solve this problem, we need to have a deterrent, so that if people come here illegally, they won't be able to stay and will be removed. That's why the Rwanda scheme is so important, and that's why I'm determined to see it through Parliament, get it up and running as quickly as possible.
Is it just me, or does he look like he's just fed up with saying stop the boats and just pressing on and talking about it? I mean, I suppose one thing, if this is actually ever going to happen, then you do need to know how to handle people who might be disruptive and everything else. I'll tell you one thing, I wouldn't want to be the cabin crew with a whole load of people who do not want to be leaving and do not want to be going to Rwanda. You know, I mean, you don't want to be serving them anything, or sitting them near the emergency exit.
I think rehearse is a weird word, because you've got the idea of stewards and stewardesses going, but what's my motivation? With the election, really. You know, it's just an odd image, and in a weird way, you almost don't want them to completely nail this, because there's so much other stuff they're not getting right. Yeah. It seems like this is actually being planned down to the sort of like the finest detail. It's just become one of those words, isn't it? Do you remember there's that point with Brexit where you say Brexit, people go, like that. You say Rwanda, and on a lower level, it's getting the same response. It's so ridiculous that they have hitched so much of their wagon to this thing that will achieve a tiny proportion of the people coming here illegally.
But the difference between Brexit and Rwanda is that Brexit really did need to be done. You know, it had been started and it needed to be finished. This doesn't. At any point, they could have just said, do you know what? We've actually woken up and smelt the coffee. We've worked out
rubbish plan.
This is
it's going to cost millions.
Once you've got into a situation where you can't find pilots because they refuse to fly these planes, which has happened. You can't find planes for the pilots to fly because the insurance companies don't want to insure those planes. You can't find judges who are going to do the appeals, so you have to wheel out an extra 150 judges. You know,
and how much is all this costing on the way to that? Because that's the other thing. You know, January is the time that lots of people do their taxes. And if you think that your taxes are going into this gigantic maw, eating up more and more money.
And every single person who ends up going to Rwanda, of which there might not be any at all, but it's going to probably cost £1 million per person, per asylum seeker who's going there, in order to win some votes for a party who are going to lose an election anyway. It's all so pointless.
I'll tell you one thing you will find is activists who'll be willing to glue their face to the floor.
Geoff,
that'll be the one thing they would not
There are
be
going to be protests and demos, all around these airports. If there are ever any aircraft actually about to take off, there will be the migrants doing the playing dead thing on the floors. It's very, very unlikely to actually happen, isn't it?
Well, that's what they're rehearsing for, though, and it's not just for the migrant stuff. It's Extinction Rebellion, all these protest groups. They're doing all of those scenarios. But actually, I don't like this at all. I think it's really distasteful, because what this sounds like, it sounds like they're treating, they're still going to be asylum seekers. These are not criminals. We've not taken the 10,000 Albanian prisoners we've got in our UK cells and we're sending them back home. These are people who still need help, and they're treating them as if they are criminals. So they're going to restrain them. They're going to be putting them in handcuffs. Once they're on the plane, from what I've been told, the inside of the plane will be much like a police van where you're transporting prisoners. They're going to have it caged, so they can take people in one by one as if they're going down for their last rites. Then they lock them in the cage, put them in their seat, they come off, then they take the next one. The way the government is treating these asylum seekers I think, is criminal.
Well, they will only be restrained if they resist. I mean, if someone walks to the plane and gets on the plane, which is legally what has been agreed, if they are being deported...
If someone on a normal flight, EasyJet, Ryanair, British Airways, whatever, if someone on that flight is drunk and starts being abusive and starts swinging at people, the cabin crew, first of all, try and get them off the plane. They don't put them in handcuffs. They don't lock them into the plane in a cage. Regardless of whether the people are being disruptive or not, and the government are saying disruptive passengers, they're still going to have them locked into that plane once they're sat in there, so they can go and get the next person in.
This hasn't even gone through the House of Lords, and it's probably not going to get through without further delay. They're saying June for the first flights to Rwanda. Well, that seems vanishingly unlikely.
And also, by that time, we'll be into general election territory, won't we?
Fingers crossed.
Well, I mean, there has to be before the end of the year, doesn't it? I think.
I think they can do it as late as
January.
January.
It has
January,
to be called before the end of the year because the latest it can be is January.